I'm Justin. I have a new job, so I forgot what it is, and my pronouns are he and they.
I'm Sadie. I work IT at a public library, and my pronouns are they, them.
I'm Jay. I'm a cataloging librarian. I'm so sick. I'm so sorry. And my pronouns are he, him.
And we have guests. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yes, I am Johnny Saunders. I'm a postdoc at UCLA. I'm also now the newly appointed CEO of PureTech Global Cyber Industrial Concern, LLC, Shady Delaware LLC, which is my lifelong dream, and one of the folks who works on this project, SciOp, that we'll be talking about.
And I'm Jez Cope. My pronouns are he, him. I currently work at the British Library for the next 3 weeks until I start a new job elsewhere, doing research data stuff. And I have had the pleasure of being on this project with Jonny for some time.
Quiet cheer. A quiet, sensible cheer. It was maxed out. It just doesn't go any louder than that. Welcome. I've been wanting to get this episode going for a while, ever since I've watched it kind of from the start, I guess. I think you started SciOp last, year or two?
Oh, Lordy. Yeah, it was last January, and I think we got it online last March, and we've been slowly hacking away at it since then.
Oh, so we've not missed the opportunity to have a big birthday celebration then?
I don't think so. And I mean, also, we get to do whatever we want. We can say we don't have any sort of formal analytics or anything like that, so numbers are meaningless and we get to make them up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I threw SciOp into the what's it built in, and it was just I don't know, third-party analytics stuff. I don't know what it's built up. All the code's just in your Python, in your GitHub, right? For the site.
Yep. It's we use none of the stack. There's not any AWS in front of us. There's not any Cloudflare in there either. It's just raw dog Python running on a random Icelandic VPS that they keep giving us for free. Shout out to FlokiNet. They're very legit web hosts, but also it just feels I don't know, we stole a little bit of computer space and are running a BitTorrent tracker on it.
Yeah, I know. They did point out that you're on an Icelandic server, and I was like, it just must be something Johnny has access to through work or whatever. I don't know. Who knows?
No, it's just some cool folks that's probably Henrik. Henrik
absolutely
is the one that has contacts and connections.
Yeah. It's just we're trying to figure out how to do this thing sort of legally-ish, and also in a way that isn't totally 100% under U.S. jurisdiction, but we also don't really know how that works, and so we're just sort of VPS outside of the United States and Iceland. It sounded nice at the time.
Iceland is very nice. Greenland is covered in ice. Yeah,
they were this is very cool. We want to support you. Can we give you a free VPS?
Yeah,
nice. So, if you had to give overview definition of SciOp, what is SciOp?
Oh, well, I mean, there's an easy explanation and then there's a more verbose one. The easy explanation is SciOp is a BitTorrent tracker for at-risk, threatened, altered, or otherwise endangered public information. And the longer explanation is what we're trying to do. We're just we're working on making BitTorrent trackers, which usually are associated with piracy. We're not trying to necessarily distance ourselves from that lineage of radical information liberation, but trying to bring it into the light and just sort of doing something along the lines that previous academic BitTorrent trackers have done, but then actually trying to integrate that into institutional as well as private, is private as in privately held, as in your random hard drive kicking around in your closet resources. So trying to take the power of BitTorrent and put it to use in ways similar that DDoS secrets and other leakers or purveyors of large data sets have done, but then apply that to the public information that's being removed from all of the government servers.
I think that's a good start. I'm interested in the idea of like getting people back into using BitTorrent as just like a way of moving files around, because, I was introduced to it at a time, I don't know, I'd have been about 10 or 11, where people were just like, yeah, I had no idea that there was a whole season of Futurama inside that Linux distro.
So it's this, I guess it fits neatly into the chronological retelling of SciOp. Is we all knew that just like the fascists were going to be coming for the information, right? But I don't know that any of us expected the ferocity and immediacy of attacking public information sources like the day that, Trump took office. And so it was just like noticing that was happening right now. We needed something that worked right now. And so there wasn't time to, bike shed about possible future technologies we would like to have. We needed something that is like, what can we run immediately that we can put in people's hands now to share and preserve large scale data sets? Because it's like that's like the kind of thing that's at threat, are these like petabyte scale climate data sets that just like, we don't have them, then even if we wanted to do anything about climate change, we couldn't, because we would just like not have the information about like what we like, where we would need to put the solar plants and so on. And so that's like the initial impetus for using BitTorrent. Not only we love it, but it's also like it exists. It's been kicking for 20 plus years. And we know for a fact that just we can get someone who has never touched a computer before. Well, most people have touched a computer that are not like computer people. And we can put something in the hands of like my mom, and she can run a BitTorrent client and double click a torrent file and it works. And so that's like, we just got that going. And also like getting a torrent indexer started is like pretty simple, as opposed to like building on some of the more complex peer-to-peer technologies that exist. It would take a huge amount of like technical development, but BitTorrent works on files, and it like is a very simple thing to do. And also like the reason why BitTorrent trackers and BitTorrent has preserved itself is like has a really nice like distribution of liability, where like by running the BitTorrent tracker, we are not actually directly legally responsible for the content. Like SciOp is not serving the content of the files, and that's served by the peers. All we do is say, hey, you can get this file over here somewhere else. And so it's like it serves well as an index in case there are sort of legal complications from, even though all the data that we host is public domain, people should have it. There's nothing legally or ethically risky in there. That doesn't really matter so much to the prison government.
Yeah, not legally risky now.
Right.
And also there's a part of me that wonders, like, whenever we're talking about computer law, like how long is it until there are bills proposed that just say BitTorrent indexing websites must be regulated or approved, or because all of the major, it is an untamed part of the web, because it is peer-to-peer in a very direct way that like very few direct peer-to-peer things on the web still are. Like there are very few things like I forget what it's called, but like offline websites, things that are just hosted from connection to connection. Like, you can't even do a direct connection over IP for a video game anymore. You've got to go onto someone else's servers. You can't just like type in your friend's phone number and call their modem and play MechWarrior 3 anymore, right? By the way, it was great back in the 56K period. You were just like, wow, it's like instant.
Yeah.
There's just no lag.
Exactly. And like, I mean, there's good and bad reasons for that. And so it's like, I'm sure that like, I feel like a lot of like the, like what we are trying to do is just like would horrify Sadie, like just like trying to like run these things on like things where like all the IT professionals in the world are like, yeah, you shouldn't be running a BitTorrent on this here network. It's got health information in it, or at least that's the stance of UCLA's IT. We're negotiating. It's fine, but for now, I have the unregulated, disallowed BitTorrent client in the UCLA Health Network. It's fine. It's safe, but
okay.
But they walled us off from the rest of the network, which is good. But that's part of the the overarching problem, and part of the overarching like background that we take place in, that just like of the sort of like de-ownership, I don't know what to call that, like the just like the actual enclosure of the web part, where just like now people started talking about this with the rise in hard drive prices and memory stuff like that, is like you're not supposed to even own a computer anymore, that like you're supposed to be using the cloud. The only thing that you should have is a phone or some other screen that allows you to access someone else's resource. So that's sort of what we're fighting upstream against, is the overwhelming urge of liability terrified administrators of all institutions of all kind wanting to run to the cloud where they have someone to sue, rather than actually owning any hardware and running any services themselves. So it's that precise arrangement that allowed a lot of the immediate harms that we saw, and some of the larger harms to come when the shakedown of all of the tech giants reaches its next phase and they start really leaning on AWS to start, I see you're over there hosting this open data set, or I see you're over there like promoting this social service. You need to take this shit off of your network, or else, shake the stick of fascism at you, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of one of the things that we saw right from the start of the Trump administration last year as well, is that there was not only stuff that was being directly targeted and directly taken down by diktat because it contained words like female or whatever the thing was, but also there was a lot of stuff that went offline because people had to cancel contracts because their funding was suddenly under question, and because they didn't have the stuff themselves.
Right. And so like that's sort of like the background assumption that a lot of scientific, academic, and other like publicly funded or institutionally funded archives made, that like we assume that this country, as its government, as its people, as like the funding mechanisms and power distribution that exists, like generally think that it's good to know things, and generally think it's good to like have information, period. And that changed overnight. That just like the general agreement that like we should continue to do information like stopped being true. And so, you're an organization, you don't have all the resources in the world. You're not like planning for every adversarial contingency, like this kind of a contingency, that now you have all of your archival materials, and what do you do with them? How do you haven't made plans for making sure that they exist in a ton of different places, that just like if we were to go down, what is our succession plan? Because we weren't planning to have our archive go down or taken down. So that's like sort of like where we had stepped in, and just sort of like not trying to say like we're trying to solve the world, or like that, blah, 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 the rest of the only us and we are the true answer. That's not what I'm trying to say. Just like trying to step in is like, okay, in an emergency situation, what are the possible things that someone could do to preserve these large scale data sets? And naturally, BitTorrent came to mind for many reasons, not least of which is like my personal history, having a lifelong love affair watching the torrent window, but also just like looking around and seeing the possible things that we could do.
And it just works.
Yeah.
We regularly get people saying, have you considered IPFS? Have you looked at that? Have you considered using Filecoin? And they are not, none of those are at a point where they like just work in the same way that BitTorrent just allowed us to start doing stuff and just worked.
Right. It's like every time we have taken any sort of step into like fancier technology, it has just brought in like 10,000 more like complications than it's worth. Even it's trying to use BitTorrent v2, which is a spec that is now like 10 years old or something like that, has proven to be a monumental technical challenge. And so just like, we're not trying to be finicky and mess with the technology. We're trying to make an archive happen. And so like, we're trying to like, at this point, the plan is to make sure it's rock solid, get the foundation in, and then we can try experimenting with more, fabulous technologies. But for now, we're just like at the stage of make sure the basics function.
Yeah, I remember in 2015, 2016, the first wave, sort of my introduction to this kind of work, which was people doing archiving of government websites. It was a lot more labor intensive than what I've seen this time around. A lot of people, it was like, okay, we're going to have 3 categories of volunteers. You're going to run Baggett. You're going to upload. You're going to help with outreach. And it was incredibly coordinated, but it was also very strange. And also I wasn't sure where everything was going to live. I was dealing with it just at my work because I was in charge of all the health websites. So obviously overnight, all of those health websites broke because whenever a new administration comes in, they change which department is going to handle which things. Their websites break, they take down studies, they add new studies. This is the kind of breaking that our government does to its own data infrastructure every new administration that I think is kind of inevitable. And I find it, so I was kind of like, where's everyone been when it happened this time? I was like, it kind of did happen 8 years before. But I did notice that people were way, way better at it this time around. I knew where the data went. I knew, I understand you were using BitTorrent. I understood what Internet Archive was doing. I understood what other web archives were doing this time around, right? Whereas the last time I was I'd learned what Baggett was. I didn't even know about it. I went to library school. And that's something only a digital archivist in a library would know about. Yeah. So not very many people know about this thing. So I like the idea that we're using a 20-year-old technology because that's archival grade tested technology at this point.
Yeah.
I like the idea of we're looking through our toolkit and we're going to use the file as in a actual file. We're going to use the chisel. We are not going to use the power drill.
Yeah. And I mean, if only we had, with this project, it's we would love to have that kind of organization to be able to have different roles and stuff like that. That's why we, for, notes for the future, we had every intention of inviting someone from the data rescue project to come along with us, but failed due to just the chaos of all of our lives. But data rescue project is much better at that. They're sort of just the sibling organization that folks will know about because they are more organized and better at doing a lot of things than we are. And one of them is making sure that people know what a role is, know how to volunteer and know how to find their work. We've just been we're sort of the scatterbrained cousin that will go in and do some heinous web scraping that when some scrape project might elude folks among them and in that labor relationship. But that's also just part of the problem this time around too, is that just there was so much of it that needed to be done that the usual suspects Internet Archive and just the typical the people who always do that probably there was just more of it than usual, that just we needed to engage more people. And there were a lot of people that wanted to be how do I do this? I think one of our, we regularly cruise the data hoarders subreddit, and just the amount of just random people that are just sort of I went and bought 1 million hard drives and I want to go get a bunch of stuff and make sure that I have a copy of it. This instinct to hoard information is good. It's a good pro-social one and widely shared. And so that was initially a lot of when we started this project, we actually got a decent amount of pushback, saying I'm just going to go and get it and store this data under my mattress, basically. That just I want to go, there was someone that was actually disagreeing with us about the notion of doing this in public, trying to make a BitTorrent archive where because that involves peers being recognizable and online, And so that someone was saying that paints a target on your back. What I'm going to do is make a private copy, hoard it, and not tell anyone, so that in the future when we might want to have it again, I'll be able to release it. And that doesn't really work that well, and for the obvious reasons of you're gonna forget, you're gonna die or lose the data, and then just like so what you it's like anyway. But that like then that poses an immediate problem is like how do you coordinate all of that energy and work, and like how do you actually make sense of everyone doing everything everywhere? And I mean, we're not original in this regard, like the web platform, like as like a way of like coordinating work. It's like as old as the internet, as just sort of just like these peer production models of let's all work together in public. But like in particular, the need for not only a way of like organizing the scrapes and the backups that were done, but like organizing the scraping, like the actual act of going and getting it. Because like that was like one of the things that especially last spring was true, is that like we'd get advance notice that some site, some data set, some archive was going down. And we'd have like, this thing is happening on Friday and there are 100 terabytes in there and the server will only serve each individual downloader like 3 megabytes a second. Go. You're just sort of like, how do you coordinate and deduplicate that action of making sure that, you know, we get all of the files, but we only get them once because we don't have time to go back and get the, you know, for everyone to go and scrape their own individual copy. And so that was like one of the, it's one of the under-designed but still present parts of SciOp, is that like, not only is it in trying to be an archive for things that exist, but it's like a coordinating space for you make target, like a data set target, like we need to go out and get this. And then there's like facility on there for splitting it up into smaller pieces. And then we even have the beginnings of something, maybe we'll talk about in a bit, but just like how to actually automate that, saying, I have this piece, someone else go and get the next one. And so we're like how to like distribute the actual act of scraping. And so that's both like a, what is everyone, like, you know, an observability question, like what is everyone doing? What does everyone have? But also like a documentation, a education and like a resource building problem. How do we teach people how to scrape the web? How do we like, you know, make these different technologies accessible? Like I think some of the, like a lot of web scraping is increasingly very accessible and easy to do. Thanks to some technologies from like, you know, friends of ours over at webrecorder who make browser tricks, make a wonderful thing that you can just basically plug and play. But still there's a lot of subtlety as far as like what comes out the other side. As you're saying, like what are the formats of the web archives? Like if you make all of this data backed up, how do you make sure it's actually usable in the future? And these are all ongoing technical and social questions that we're sort of engaging with.
I think it was very interesting that we were starting this all up at the same time as the internet was just going completely wild with scrapers, and very, very badly written scrapers from everyone and their dog with a tech startup being like, we're going to get our own corpus and train our own AI and be the next OpenAI. And so we were immediately sort of fighting all of the countermeasures that have been put in place against that.
Yeah. It's awkward. Like web scraping used to be cool and edgy. And like, it's like, I miss that part of, you know, that era of web culture where like, I mean, the value shift where, I mean, it's like reflected in like copyright law and our understanding of copyright and piracy is like consumption used to not be valuable. Like, you know, that was not the valuable part. The valuable part was in distribution. And so when it became disgustingly profitable to just consume things, that shifted the landscape as far as like, well, scraping is not really great, because before it'd be like, yeah, you'd get a web scraper, but you weren't really concerned with like the impact on your servers because it'd be relatively minor. You were concerned with them having your data. And like, what are they going to do with it? Oh, they're going to have a private copy of it. Oh no, like that means they won't have to come to the website anymore. Like that was the biggest problem. And so it's a real shame that like when we say we're doing a scrape, it's like, no, but not like that kind. Like, you know, not like, you know, that like scraping these sites to make them available, like to not to hoard them and train a private model and like convert other people's labor into profit for us. It's like actually to to decrease, like, and so does like a lot of like what we're doing as far as like coordinating scraping goes, and making these BitTorrent backed archives of things is like one of the things that is a longer term goal when we talk about like the next step beyond like the emergency response to a bunch of data disappearing is like, what does a longer term archive look like? And it's like, longer term, we want to decrease the burden on these institutions and decrease the hosting like cost for them by supplementing them with a lot of other people's resources and bandwidth. We're not trying to be the next scraper that's hitting your page 100 times a minute just so it can get the fresh text to eat and then like fuck off into its own oblivion. So it's a real shame that the culture has shifted that way. But yeah, we do have to I wish there was a way to differentiate pro-social scraping from the kind of stuff that all of the tech giants are doing.
No, we're the nice ones.
Yeah, no, we're good. Like, just trust me, I'm good because I say I'm good.
Leave it to the tech giants to take something good and pro-social and somehow make it into a profit-churning bullshit. So, yeah.
Yep, it's what they do best.
I think that's good enough for people to understand kind of what SciOp's doing. So I want to talk about the people more because like we're talking about pro-social stuff. So I guess focused on the people, like who's working SciOp now, as much as you want to, I know people who's working it now, and then who do you want to come in, and like what do you want people to do with SciOp? Like, you're, like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was on this recording because we had some recording issues, but your website is available on GitHub for people to copy to make their own SciOp website. So like, what do you want people to do with it?
So
let's talk about people.
Yeah, the people. So I think most of the folks involved are pseudonymous in some way. I think so. I don't necessarily, it's like torn between giving credit and also not doxing people, we're like, and so like we initially, so the named folks in here are like like a core of us, I guess, nucleated pretty quickly around Henrik, who's taking a bit of a break now, was like the dynamo of a human being that he is, sort of like brought a bunch of folks together. And then the other folks that are named and on public documents associated with SciOp are like Will Waits is another person who's like helped us out greatly as far as like connecting us with old web, whenever everyone's like, we need to like contact someone who knows about the deep lore about the internet. It's sort of just like, we'll just immediately know someone. Anyway, I don't want to necessarily like list off like everyone. I feel like we should give like just a list of credits or something like that in the show notes, because I just feel bad naming people, because just like that's just part of the part of the internet that we are in is like no names, no faces. Our most prolific contributor is Triple Shrimp, and we have no idea who they are, but we just know that we love them, and they are like a one of the most like tenacious archivists that I've ever seen before. And so so like we have a core of us that are just like, that we sort of know who some of the people are, but most of them we actually don't know who they are, and just like people who have gravitated towards this kind of project. And as far as like the people we want to be involved and like external people to be involved is like the bad answer to that is everybody, like that's the lazy answer is like, we want everybody to be involved in this. And to some degree that's true. We're just like that is actually something that I mean, I'm being flippant on that, but like that is something that we've sort of endeavored to make available. That is like, if you want to, like, that's the kind of permission structure that we're trying to make is no permission structure. Like, you don't have to wait for someone to tell you to do something. That just like, you don't have to like say like, go and be in the queue and go and prove yourself. Like, do one, it's like getting jumped into the scraping gang is just sort of like, go and prove to me that you can scrape the web, and then we'll give you a task. It's more like we want to like put the things in people's hands, because everyone else out there knows what needs to be preserved better than we do. It's sort of, that's like the people that are closer to the problem and like make sure that they can do the work of gathering and sharing their resources, because we can't know what is at risk in the time that it takes to actually protect that information. So, but longer term, so as far as the code goes, and what the plan is with other SciOps and stuff.
Yeah,
that's also a big part of the dream of the project, is that this comes sort of. I think that we talked about this on one of the previous times I was on here. Just these wait, hold on, I might be a little bit frozen. Hang on.
I think we can still see and hear you.
Yeah, we can see and hear you.
Okay, everyone is frozen on my screen.
That just can happen. Okay. You froze for me for a little bit. That the video can freeze a little bit.
Okay, we'll cut out the dead air moment there. But
no, it's fine.
But yeah, so I think we talked about this a bit on one of the last times that we were on here, is just this history of boom and bust and rise and calamitous collapse of BitTorrent trackers, and how that just that is how BitTorrent trackers work historically, is that especially in private BitTorrent trackers, you'll have this massive accumulation of labor and organization accumulating these huge archives of media, and then the law will come knocking and the tracker will get shut down, the database will be lost. And one of the things that's remarkable about private BitTorrent trackers is how resilient that actually proves to be, where just when the successor tracker shows up, everyone sort of rallies and re-uploads everything they have, and it might come back online in a matter of weeks, which is incredible, compared to other possible results when other kinds of archives go down. But it still is a power struggle, and it literally it will often be a battle of wheels and a battle of personality. I'm thinking about this Mac tracker, Broken Stones, that just to go off on a little bit side, there's this private BitTorrent tracker that hosts Mac, cracked Mac applications, Broken Stones. And it's one of the admins took hostile control over the site and rerouted a bunch of the donations to their crypto wallet or something like that. And then so the people chose to shut down the site to protect users from this admin. And then the successor site showed up, and then that hostile admin tried to worm their way in through IRC into the admin of that new site. Just being that, there's all the history of dramas and and sort of a Greek tragedy of keeping these archives running. And so anyway, with that as a background, one of the things we're trying to do is try and address that problem with a bit of a redesign about how introducing federation to the idea of BitTorrent trackers, where we're in the same way that I don't know, we don't need to do a what is federation, right? Thing here. Lots of computers. Yeah.
We talked about it on the last episode. Go listen to the last episode where we talked about federation for 2 episodes in a row with Jonny.
Yeah. Yeah. So just this idea that instead of it being one SciOp and that's a unitary thing, we want to do the same thing here, where we have a number of these different trackers that can be online, that can all talk to one another and share metadata back. And so something like that doesn't really exist as far as we know. There are some things that are like it. So for example, I saw a project, someone linked it to me 2 or 3 days ago, that was another huge French BitTorrent tracker went down. And then a bunch of people went and put all of those torrents on Nostr, for example. There are other things that exist that are roughly trying to make these BitTorrent in particular, but in general, just large data set archives spread out across domains. But what we're trying to do is both preserve the social coordination, which is the main role that BitTorrent trackers actually have. So people think, this is another question we got initially. It's just why are you using a tracker? I thought trackers were obsolete now that we have DHT and other ways of directly exchanging peers between each other. So that's the technical role of a BitTorrent tracker, is to, when I go and download a torrent, I go and ask the tracker who else has got this torrent. And so the tracker is the one that'll be telling me, go and connect to this other IP address and so on. And so like that's one of the roles of a tracker. But the other more important role of the tracker is a site of social coordination, a site of giving organization and structure to a bundle of torrents, and in particular giving a focus to it. So just like, in the same way that WhatCD focused labor towards archiving music, having SciOp focusing labor as like a place to put the public information torrents is what, the main thing that it actually does. And so building those kind of like social systems into the tracker, and then making that, then the next step is making those social systems extend across multiple trackers. And there's like some interesting technical and social challenges that come up with that, where like a lot of the peer-to-peer space, especially lately, post-crypto boom, can lean very libertarian in terms of its design and its goals. That like the goal is to make the one big public archive of everything, and that like that's not exactly, doesn't really fit in this context, but also like it's just a very particular arrangement of power and how that's supposed to work. And so, so I'm thinking about one of the most recent examples that's like a challenge for this is like, we wanted to distribute a data set that we weren't really sure we could. And we also wanted to make sure that like the origin of it was not so obvious. And so we needed a way to pre-distribute that data before we made it public. And so if you build your system around assuming that everything is public, everything should be public, and it should always be immediately available, then you don't really have the means of making these sort of like gray area private negotiations and discussions and stuff like that that might need to happen for data that's a little more sensitive. And so we need a federation and a sharing model that can scale from private, literally peer-to-peer, as in like, I want to know exactly who's involved in this swarm of peers, up to the global public index. So that's like the next step as far as what we're working on this year, where like last year we got the thing running and we got a bunch of data sets, got our wins as far as like some nice archival work done, and foot in the door as far as like getting a base of seeders online. And then the next step will be making federation happen. And so we want to do an interesting blend of what AT Proto is doing and what ActivityPub is doing here. And I don't necessarily know, I don't know what degree of technical detail would be good to say, but I'll just say that like in broad strokes, we want to do some of the nice things that AT Proto is doing as far as like having these mobile, like very mobile units of coordination, where like instead of having the server own everything, making it so that just like it is possible for people to like own their own personal space of this, and building in like the social graph down to an individual account or person or something like that, that then exists on a network of these gateways. But then also doing some of the things that ActivityPub does better, which is like being able to have better control over who has access to things, and being able to have better control over like the actual way that the data spreads throughout the system, as opposed to with AT Proto, you assume that it just goes everywhere. And so it's like, that's the, I don't, like I said, I'll stop there to say that like there's a lot of probably boring details that go into like what that actually means, but that's the next step in broad strokes, is we're trying to make a federation model that fits the needs of sensitive, sometimes personally identifiable, but also public domain data, and how to like make that actually function both in like a gray archive, but then increasingly into legit archive space.
Yeah. So let me try and make that a little more concrete, interpersonally and professionally. So like, I'm starting a new job next month, and if I wanted to approach them and say, hey, we have a big research infrastructure, we're a big target of this administration, and we're a private institution, we're not a state institution, what angles would I approach of saying we should start a SciOp here? Of saying like, we should use our compute for this, we should convince the local SADI to let us start up a BitTorrent software, and we should spend staff time on this. Like, so like if you you already have like control over your ability to do this at your job. But like if I'm going to be in the library, I can talk to some people in computing, but I'm probably going to have to go talk to IT or some department. So like, where am I? How do I convince like, part of the bureaucracy or get them on board?
Well, yeah. So it's a complicated question. So
so we're here for.
Right. So there's a couple different angles for this. Like, and some of them is like, this is all work to be done at the moment because like I said, it's next year of work. But like the goal is to make it as minimal as possible. And so like that's actually something that is how SciOp has been designed from the bottom up, is that just like we wanted to make it ridiculously deployable, where like if you were to just like pop into your neighborhood like vibe coding software and say, make me a website, what it would make you is something that is like has like 10 different services running. You must that like a heavy full stack application that has like, that you need to basically have a degree in sysadmin, to run. And SciOp is not that. SciOp is like a Python program that just like single install and no external web services. You just press play and go. And so at the moment, it is integrated as a full stack website, but we start breaking those pieces apart, where what we want to do is be able to have like a metadata federation node underlay thing that like you have all of your existing resources. Like you have all of your storage in some CMS somewhere, and you have all of your metadata in a system that like we're not trying to supplant that. Like that's another thing that like we don't want to do or don't want to try and do, because every time that someone tries to come up with the next unifying metadata system and ignore all of the embedded labor and time and local expertise that goes into that, it fails, and it's like it's an embarrassing situation. So we're not.
You now have 11 standards.
Yeah. And it's just like disrespectful, basically, like to metadata workers. Like you don't know how to do your own job and stuff like that. Just say like, no, come and do it on our thing. But like making it possible to have this system exist side by side with something like that it can ingest the metadata, it can bridge to your existing system and pull that metadata out, and make it so that just like you have everything that you have currently, but then also have a BitTorrent underlay with it. So that like the things that adds or concretely brings to organization is that like what we want to offer as not a service as in like we're selling a service, but like offer as in like this approach is to, one, be able to make your metadata and your archival information more robust by giving it a concrete shareable form that just like, this is sort of like, again, hearkening back to conversations that we had like last time when we were talking about linked data, just like SciOp is a linked data application. Like it like publishes all of its metadata in RDF already. And so just like what we want to do is like basically like you can ingest any sort of like linked data, metadata that you have, and here's a data set, and it corresponds to these files. And those files are on your CMS somewhere. And so we can make a torrent, derive it from that data. And now what you have is your metadata, your data on your CMS, and a torrent that refers to both of those things. And so then someone who wants to download it can download that torrent. They will download it from your servers, but then also then become an independent source for that information. So that were your archive to completely fail or go down, what you already have out in the world then are these very small, very portable descriptions of what your data is, how to get it, who has it. And so you just make your single monopolar archive into a distributed archive with very little additional effort or very little change to your existing systems.
Let me spin a scenario, so that I can make this, because I don't want this to bounce off like library workers too much, and I want to make this really easy for people who are like, I didn't understand anything you said in this episode, but I want to help. Where do I go? So
tether me to earth, baby.
So I have a lot of experience in academic libraries doing different things. So let's say it sounds like what I can do is maybe I can rustle up enough IT support to say like, okay, I want to spin up like one server to run this SciOp site. And what I'm going to do then is maybe work with our data librarian or our Skullcom person and say, okay, all these data sets that we have in the repository, or that people have in their labs. We're going to help coordinate them to create torrents of that data that's already living on their servers so they don't have to move anything. We're going to create these torrent files. We're going to say, here's the URI. It's going to point straight to it. So someone, much in the same way that part of institutional repository success is emailing them saying, send us the file and we'll upload it for you. Emailing them saying, tell us the URI for where this lives, and then we will create a torrent for you. And so someone in the library could start building up the SciOp project by adding torrents and files, and we would just have to control one small server, and then everything should be able to seed from that URI. Would that work?
That's about right. That's about right.
Yeah, this is the web seed concept, isn't it? Where sort of within the torrent metadata, as well as a bunch of trackers that you can go to ask for peers that already have this content. You also include plain old-fashioned HTTPS URL that also holds the same content. And so if there are no peers online, you just start downloading it from the web, which might be your repository, or it might be some department or lab's website or whatever. And then as soon as you've started downloading, you start peering those chunks that you've already got, and it kind of kickstarts the swarm that way. And so I think with my institutional hat on, one of the nice selling points of that is, again, going back to the scraping thing, in an age where all of our websites are being bombarded with scrapers all of the time, there's potential at least to distribute that load on your own infrastructure, because as soon as one person's downloading it, the next person can download it from 2 places, and then the next person can download it from 3 places. And I think thinking about sort of what people who listen to everyone's just turned their videos off, or is it me? Okay, yeah, I think
no, it's just Jez's feed is struggling, but since this records locally, we'll be able to hear everything you said just fine.
Cool.
So we'll agree with whatever you said just there, and you sound very smart, we promise, even though I didn't know what you said. Yeah, totally, for sure.
That's the magic of using this software. That's the reason we put up with all of its bullshit, is that whenever that happens, we didn't just lose all your audio.
Yeah.
I got most of it, but then you started trailing off into robot voice. It was very impressive.
That was probably about the time I noticed everyone else's video going very MPEG artifact.
Yeah, you're back now. Cool. So, what was the last bit that you said?
Where was I getting up to? Oh yeah, so there's a nice argument to be made from an institutional perspective of this will help to relieve the load on your infrastructure, and this is exactly why Linux distributions have been distributing ISOs using torrents for years. Aside from the sort of piracy thing, that's the other thing that BitTorrent gets used a lot for, and it means that the small organizations throwing up their own Linux distro can distribute it without it completely crashing their tiny servers.
Yeah, it makes me think about, and something I've thought about before but haven't really explored, is how when you go on archive.org and there's a file, and one of your options is just to download a torrent. Why don't we do that for institutional repositories and data repositories? Because those are starting to get big. I mean, I know one of the reasons is because we use proprietary software for our institutional repository, and Clarivate and Elsevier don't want to support that. So, because the last institutional repository I worked with was Digital Commons, which is the Elsevier used to be called bpress. But we put some big files on there. The fact
that you have to have software installed on your computer to handle torrents a lot of the time, and if you're on an administered computer, the permissions involved with that, especially if you're faculty, your work computer, you probably don't have permission to do that kind of downloading.
Yeah, but it doesn't. There's no permission needed for Elsevier to give me the torrent file of the data on there. There's a download button, there's a download torrent button. There's a download raw file button. It costs them basically nothing to do that, right?
But then you have to have the software on your computer to be able to do torrents.
Yeah, well, that's my problem. Side. I'm just talking about the why can't our software provide that option? Is there a technical reason?
No. So as Jay is saying, it's like most of the limitation is on the like recipient side, and on like part of the beautiful thing about BitTorrent is that it problematizes the difference between serving and receiving. Like that's sort of the whole point, is that everyone is both. But yeah, like it's like that's like the major roadblock, is that just like people needing to be able to run some different software that isn't a web browser in order to so you'd hate to have this be a way that diminishes access to information, like, putting in a place that like people can't access it just because of the software. And so like there's some approaches for that, but in the ideal case, it is a purely additive thing that like, as exactly what you're saying of we just add torrents and they are just an additional download mechanism. That's the idea. That like, and I think that like that BitTorrent can be very mysterious. And so like one of the things that we wrote in our documentation is like, what is BitTorrent? Trying to demystify that a bit. And it's like, it's so simple, you would not even believe it. That just like, there's one of the other, I say this all the time, and I just like don't know how much I never know how much this lands. And it's like, when you're talking about peer-to-peer, it's like BitTorrent is like the Hegel of peer-to-peer, where just like you can't really have like a disposition towards peer-to-peer without reconciling your disposition towards BitTorrent. Like it's so fundamental and foundational to what peer-to-peer is that it's like everything else is sort of like in some way derivative of it or reacting to it, or like, that like, and so all that it is just like you take a data, take a whatever, a file, a stream of bits, chop it up into little pieces, make hashes of those, which are just like a abbreviated representation of that data, where it's like, if you get that data, you can do the same operation, the same hash operation. And then if the hashes match, you know that you got the correct data. And that's pretty much it. Like that, like you just have pieces of data and distribute them. So what it means to make a torrent is literally to just read your files and then produce another file that's just like a very small reference to those files. And then that's it. So whenever you're hosting data, presumably you have read access to the data that you're hosting. Hopefully, you just hash the data and then you post it along with a hashed representation of it. It's almost the same thing as posting checksums along with your data, except these are checksums you can download. So that's the minimal lift that it takes is the selling point. And like, why don't we do that? Like, so also think about like the interface for that though with like archive.org, where like, why don't you use the torrent option every time there? And part of it is because like the important like social element of that is not really centered on a lot of these interfaces. So it's like in the same way that like Wikipedia hides all of the work of the pages in the talk pages and in like the wiki projects and stuff like that, so that like what comes out on the other side is like this beautiful, pristine, unproblematic encyclopedia article. Like if you don't surface the swarm, like you don't show that there are n peers here, if you were to join the swarm, you would be like another one of them. Like these things need more peers versus these, like if you don't like design that into the interface, then it's just sort of like, oh, it's an additional download option. Why would I choose the weird one? And it's like, and so part of it is like a social project of like making users of data feel like they've got some skin in the game and they can participate in its availability. So if I'm like a regular, so that's a major issue with a lot of the current data that's being backed up and lost. That like these are data sets that are used by thousands of people all over the world, but they only exist in one place. And so these are like, it's like you have so many people that rely on it and have resources that could contribute to make it available, but that's just not how they see their role as in the system. They are a user or a consumer of this data set, not necessarily a co-owner of this data set. And so like that's like part of the social change of if you then surface so if you go on to, we don't have this yet, we're working on it, but like academic torrents, I think it's .com, I forget what it is. It might be .org, whatever. Academic torrents is like the other like major academic data tracker. They have like these like little sponsor widgets or whatever. Like when you're a web seed for some data set, it'll say like hosted by blah blah blah. They're just like giving people like a little brag point that they can say, I'm helping to make this thing available.
Yeah, the beauty and the curse of torrenting is always like someone has to be doing it.
Yeah.
And the more that people do it, the better. And if enough people aren't doing it, then like no one can use that file.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like normalizing having web seeds as well, because you don't put web seeds in a torrent for the latest blockbuster movie because you don't want to like have it available from this website.
Maybe explain. I mean, you did kind of explain web seeds, but kind of maybe give it another. It's basically like instead of having a person who has their PC on overnight, you have a web server that has the file, and if there's no peers, it will be the peer, basically.
Yeah, and that can literally be like your existing data repository.
Exactly. In fact, we do this regularly. So so all the web seed is so again, what a torrent file is a set of chunks of data that have hashes to them. And so when you're downloading over BitTorrent, you'll go and ask other peers, give me this chunk, give me chunk 10, you got chunk 15, cool. A web seed is that, but HTTP servers. So just like all HTTP servers you can request a range of bytes from them. So instead of going and downloading the whole file, just saying, I need byte range X to Y. And pretty much every HTTP server can do this. If they can't, it's like ancient. It's like it must be extremely ancient. Like this is
it's been deliberately disabled.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I remember using this program called WebAnts when we were on dial-up. Remember WebAnts? So if your computer this was like when DSL was starting to come out, so files were starting to get bigger. But if you were still on dial-up, you would add this little browser add-on called WebAnts, and you would feed the URL for the download into it. You would like right-click on the file and say download with WebAnts, and it would chunk it up so that if you lost your connection, like someone made a phone call or whatever, it would download bits and pieces, and you would watch the little chunks turn blue as each chunk was downloaded. Yeah, because your stupid modem couldn't keep up with trying to download like a GIF of Danzig's face. Yeah.
That's exactly what your BitTorrent client is doing, except rather than pulling them all from the one place, it's like who's got this piece, who's got this piece.
So like this is like a part, and that's part of the there's like layers of experience with BitTorrent, and just like most people have never had much experience with it at all. The people that have had experience with it, like that will be, especially with rare torrents, that will be like a common experience too. That just like I tried to get something and it's not there. And so that's like the fear that we experience from a lot of people, that it's like, well, if we put it on BitTorrent, then like eventually people will stop seeing it, will be gone. And like that's true, but that's also true of the archives. So like and so if you think of your web archive, like wherever you are hosting the data, like whether that be in some S3 bucket somewhere or your institutional hosting service, just think of that as a peer. And so it's like when I say it's strictly additive, that's what we mean. Is like we're only adding more peers, and your existing thing is just a very big one that's added as a web seed. It's a different kind of peer, but a peer nonetheless. And so I think that like one thing that is like an immediate and obvious thing that you can do is that like if you both have web seeds and the ability to add web seeds to things after the fact, then you can do something that you can't currently do with like existing HTTP archive tech, which is like download from multiple of them at once. So we have these data repositories where I think about from a researcher's point of view too, where like when I'm going to archive my data, like I can put it on like my discipline specific archive. Or sometimes you might have an NIH archive, like for like the genetics and genomics people will have like but you put it on there and that's the only place that it is. And if I wanted to add it to Zenodo or whatever, that's like an additional step. And then now someone will have to choose between these two things and it's one or the other. But like having a torrent with web seeds, what that immediately allows you to do is so there's like, say there's an institutional collaboration, we are co-hosting this data together. That like, this happens all the time. Like there are like multiple institutions that are involved with collecting, organizing, curating, and hosting data. is that now it's possible for me to download it from all of them at once. Even if there are only webcs, even if there are only HTTP servers in the mix, no peers, I can still spread my downloading out and use bandwidth from all of these things at the same time.